Hi, my name is Bernhard. I am the managing editor of the Crimson, and I'm introducing Jeff Young. I have a little bit more of a personal introduction because Jeff was my editor last summer at the Chronicle of Higher Education when I interned there. So Jeff is sort of Chronicle's idea guy. Every morning at the 10 a.m. news meeting that we would have, he would sort of step back when responding to the news for first day or second day stories and say, like what are new ways that we can tell the story? What are different formats? What are different angles at which we can approach whatever we're covering? So he recently ran the Explainer unit, which was a unit at Chronicle that sort of was dedicated to telling stories in new formats, and he told me yesterday that they recently started a podcast there, which he is spearheading, so lots of really cool new things coming from Chronicle. He's written for the publication since 1995, has also written for, what was that?
I said that's a long time.
Yeah.
I saw the gasp.
Yeah, it's an incredibly long amount of time for one publication, but amazing. And he also dabbled and written in other publications like New York Times, New Scientist, Slate, Wall Street Journal. He specifically focuses on sort of the intersection of higher education and technology, and in 2014 was a fellow here at Nieman, focusing on MOOCs and sort of disruption in higher education. At the same time, he was also a fellow at the Berkman Center for Internet and Society, and just an incredible journalist and a great editor. So it is my pleasure to introduce Jeff.
Thanks, Meg. That's awesome. Yeah, we were really lucky to have Meg, and there's plenty of examples I could show just of her work for good stuff. So no, this is a good topic. This is a great topic, but it's also one where I realize I'm on a difficult one because you guys are covering campuses every day, of course. So it's almost like everyone's a movie critic. This one, you guys have a lot of knowledge, and I actually want to tap into that knowledge near the end of this presentation and get you guys involved. But I am at the Chronicle of Higher Education. We're national. We have a paywall. Josh mentioned the paywalls, and I know that can be frustrating. But the good news is, if you guys are on a campus, pretty much most campuses in the country now have a site license. So if you're on your campus network, you should be able to. It just should work. Like you should be able to get through the paywall and read our articles for free, which is useful. So I wanted to just go over. I have like 3 parts to this talk. But I first just want to give you a reminder of how great it is that you're at a campus paper doing news. Obviously, it's a great place to experiment your students and all that, but covering colleges, this is the best time ever to cover colleges, I think. And of course, I will confess, I spoke here a couple years ago and I said the same thing, but it's more so now than then. And let me tell you why. Not only is it, of course, like not to be an ambulance chaser, but when something's in crisis or going through a lot of change, that's an exciting time to tell a story. College fits into that boat, as you guys know. But also, really, the kind of biggest issues facing the country have their kind of crosshairs often at a college campus right now, or at many college campuses. So you're in a place, obviously, where college to workforce is an issue. Like, what is college for? And this is I'm sure, a very pressing issue for all of you. Is it this old function of this kind of like traditional function of the canon and preparing you to be good citizens, and or how much of it is really more workforce oriented, and then what is that workforce going to be anyway? Those robots that Josh mentioned that will be doing some journalism or doing some other things in the economy. So how do you prepare for a world like that? And so colleges are going through that, and obviously you guys are living and breathing that issue. Racial tensions, of course. And they're playing out on campuses, sexual assault issues, gender issues in this country, gun control, not just the fact that campus shootings happen, which is terrible. I hope they stop, but also just these in Texas and other states, there's campus carry laws happening, and the issue that campuses are trying to say, well, what does that mean to implement? You're literally on some campuses drawing lines of like where is it okay to be armed and where is it not, and this playing, these are very much microcosms of all these incredibly important issues that you'll face no matter what you do in journalism as you leave. And of course the technological changes in the way you're consuming media, and you're in a place where you're in this community of other people consuming news in kind of new ways, or being raised with, don't think they use digital natives anymore, but basically growing up with your set of technologies that people older than you like had different assumptions and expectations. So all of that's to say, this is a great time to be doing the kind of journalism you guys are doing, and you're lucky to be doing it at this time. So yay. So part one is I want to talk a little bit about where to look for stories. I know you guys obviously are finding great stories. That's how you're here today. But just to give some examples of some places we've found, some interesting rocks we've turned over. One is I think academic conferences are, obviously they're not necessarily like always something you even go to in person. They're not necessarily scintillating always. But conference programs for all kinds of things, small and large, are online. And your professors on your campus may be speaking at them, and you can sort of detect when that's happening. Issues you're covering could be having academic conferences. And these programs from the conferences are basically like from your perspective, like a source list of like, these are leaders in the field, or these are people with really big ideas that you could go call. And so the programs are there, but also increasingly videos, just like the one that's being recorded of me at this very moment, are being posted online. And you'll be surprised if, let's say, you're doing a profile of a professor, or that professor has probably given a lot of talks. You could go watch some of those talks. You could kind of go down a rabbit hole and watch a lot of talks. But no, I will tell you, a lot of journalists probably aren't, and you could find interesting things they said, maybe with great candor and frankness, that they would not say to you. And so then you could then have that quote in your story and have the link to it. And I did this recently with I did a profile just the other day of Sanjay Sarma at MIT. And one of the things that's part of the profile that makes him what he's doing is he's going around to a lot of places at MIT and kind of drumming up support for his thing. And so a lot of these tiny workshops that I would never have even known about had their full video presentations online. And so I could just quote from some of the things he said in that context. Now this goes without saying, but I want to say just a little bit about Twitter, because Twitter's such a powerful tool, but there certainly are ways, I feel like in a way it's getting, as it's changing and as it's finding itself, but it almost takes more and more knowledge to make it useful to a journalist, or just kind of a little bit of work. And Twitter lists, if you're not using them already, are a fantastic way to do this. This bit.ly link is one that one of our news editors put together, which is basically beat reporters across the country covering education at papers large and small. And so you can just see what they're tweeting, and this is a great radar for national education issues. Obviously, make your own lists based on what you need. It's really pretty easy to make these lists. You can share the lists so that other people in your newsroom can just put them into something like a TweetDeck or a Hootsuite or whatever your do people use clients like that for Twitter? Who uses something like a TweetDeck or Hootsuite? So if you don't know what those are, that's great. And there are a bunch of these clients, and you can just have it so your screen is filled with these, little streams of things you can just have. It's like, I kind of think, and this just tells you that how much a geek I am or something, but it's almost like looking out the window onto campus, but it's like to campuses and to issues and to conferences. And hashtags are hashtag reporting is a skill, I think, that is good to know. This is an example that we had very recently. One of our reporting interns basically she's I think is just finishing high school in Minnesota. She has a lot of friends in Wisconsin. So University of Wisconsin at Madison is one of the many campuses that's having issues of questioning kind of the racial legacy and some comments that have been made, sort of perceived racist comments on campus. And so there was this hashtag, the real UW, that was starting to kind of get a lot of attention. She noticed one of her friends on Facebook was talking about it. So she put it in her, TweetDeck and started to kind of pay attention to it. Now, it wasn't a story yet, because unfortunately in this day and age, just having a campus controversy about race in and of itself is not a news story necessarily, at least for a national publication. But she just kind of kept an eye on it. And then one day she noticed that the vice provost of diversity kind of put up this video on YouTube, and it was being tweeted about on the hashtag. And I'm gonna see if it'll play. I don't want to take up too much time, so you get a flavor of it.
Look, hashtag WW. I'm sitting here looking at an image that was just sent to me by Lower Berkeley Junior students of a cowardly act. fuck with Buggy, with Bucky. You fuck with Buggy, you fuck with us. Fuck you, nigga bitch.
Should I have language
This
warning?
was slid on the door of a dorm room of a student here at the UW by another student. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what the world is coming to, but this needs to stop.
Okay, so
It needs to stop.
So this was sort of a story, obviously, and pardon the language, obviously, but this is something that, having this, we were able to get that story quicker than some people in the national media, especially because we were watching that hashtag. And I feel like I hate to just move on from this in such rapid succession after such a heavy issue, but certainly there are. Yik Yak is like just as much of comments like this. So has anyone used Yik Yak for? Is this something people use on their campuses? Does anyone have even if they're not using it, are they seeing campus controversies erupt because of Yik Yak? So, and even some student papers are kind of working with Yik Yak. Actually, there were a couple experiments. But we saw an interesting story with a student affairs conference that basically, this was student affairs administrators at a conference where there were, student affairs administrators know Yik Yak maybe more than some administrators because they're dealing with student affairs. But they were starting to have these comments going up on the hashtag at their student affairs conference where they were sort of talking about hooking up with other people at the conference, and there were some other things going on that were kind of unprofessional in many people's eyes. And so this became a story of people, like Yik Yak going wrong, the way administrators kind of criticize students for using Yik Yak, but it was happening with administrators at a conference. And so it became an interesting story. We actually had a reporter on the ground at that conference who didn't even know this was going on, which is also another thing about these interesting social media apps. But we, luckily, somebody in our newsroom saw it probably on social media. And then we were able to do a co-byline story with somebody in the office kind of watching these and talking to people and having the person on the ground that's then cued into it. They actually even had a session that they quickly spun up at the conference to talk about how to behave yourself on social media as an administrator. So you can find out about things like this on social media, obviously. There's a site called Imgur. Does anyone know this site? I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right because I just kind of consume it. Yeah. This is viral pictures that are often, GIFs, animated GIFs. This is stuff that's fun to look at, right? This is stuff that's going viral elsewhere on social media. But it's all collected and you can search it. So you could search for your own college's name, you could search for things. So I've actually found a couple stories there. One is this one, pardon the language again, but this one was one that a student put up at a university. And this was about, she'll edit your papers, and she has this cat. So we did a profile of her. The intern that was working with me then found her, and she was a great story. But it's okay, and it did very well on the internet, not surprisingly. But it wasn't just this, okay, it sounds a little BuzzFeedy, clickbaity of the cat is there. But it was interesting when you started to pull the thread on what she was doing in her homemade writing coaching that she put up on this flyer on a telephone pole. It was out of frustration with the resources on her campus about the writing center not being open when she needed it or not being as, kind of giving her what she wanted. So it actually, for us, it tapped into an issue that was like a story other than being a great feature. There was another one that we found on Imgur. It was this 1920s era application for admission to Elon College in North Carolina. And look at the things here if we can read them. Who's your pastor's name and address? What sports do you play? Is your health good? Question. And it was one page. It was only one page. That's the entire application to college. Just a different era. And so we did a story where we interviewed the student in the archives who had posted that originally. It turns out it was a student employee who put this online. And basically had asked her boss at the archive, is it okay if I put this on Reddit? And the boss said, sure, what's Reddit? And when it was on Reddit, it went viral and it was millions of views. But we ended up doing a story where we interviewed people at Elon about and the archivist is Hugh, about like pulling up applications over like, over like 4 different time periods from the 20s to now, and looking at those applications and how they'd evolved, and talking to administrators about, how that really says something about the college, who's in college, and what college is doing. So it turned out to be a pretty interesting story. Close reading of national news. So this is obvious. Obviously, I hope you guys are news consumers. But we had an intern recently who, obviously the protests in Missouri were interesting. Were gathering the attention of the whole country. And he was wondering, he noticed that there was a line in one of the stories that said, like, the police were very militarized, right? This was, now we've all heard these stories, but it was early on. And he's like, I wonder if campus police have things like that. Well, sure enough, he found that University of Central Florida has a grenade launcher. University of Maryland at College Park near me has this beautiful armored car. Our staff photographer went down and took the picture of this thing. I mean, this is, so he basically decided to look into it and did a public records request of campuses across the country where he could get FOIAs, and found, basically just gathered a spreadsheet of information about who had participated in a Department of Defense program, I believe it was, to make grants to different police departments, including college police departments, for these kinds of high caliber armor and weapons. So that was an intern story that, because he thought of it, he did the story, and it was a data story. So data, this is kind of the big one. I think you have a session on it at this conference later. This is so important. If you don't know this already, be very excited about data. If you're anywhere, even if you don't think spreadsheets are ooh and ah worthy, maybe start to think about it that way, because there are some amazing sources of information about the college world. IPEDS is I love Washington, right? We're based in Washington, D.C. IPEDS, of course, is the Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System. That's released. Both the acronym and the long form are like completely unsayable, but it is the Ed Department, U.S. Department of Education's database on everything from completion rates to, cost of tuition, all kinds of important things to, you might not find the hottest story right there, but it's going to be great background to kind of put your own institution in context. And there are tools around, there are better tools these days that the Ed Department has and others have to sort through that information. IRS forms, obviously you guys know, if it's a private university, they're required to file these tax forms that have good things like salaries. GuideStar is one place you can search those. The Chronicle of Higher Education also has some good searchable features on that. NACUBA, again, wow, these organizations sound exciting. That's the National Association of College and University Business Officers. Now you're hooked. That means it's financial aid. They have a lot of good financial aid data on their website. I actually gave this information to the conference website. Is going to have links to all these as well. The AAUP, Association of American University Association of University Professors, has data on salaries and obviously census. But the 2 down there at the bottom are the most important. Public record requests, obviously. You think you're not gonna, it's not just gonna be a website you can just go find the hottest story, otherwise somebody might have probably beat you to it. But there are ways to think about public records of, like, even if you're at a campus that is a state school, maybe in a non-sunshine state, there's some reason you can't get as many public records. Sometimes that you're talking about an arrangement where other campuses might have been in a similar arrangement, and you could go FOIA what they're doing, and often companies kind of have universal contracts with different people. And then there's something that one of my colleagues reminded me. Most campuses these days are beefing up their institutional research offices, Office of Institutional Research, and every campus is a little different on this. But they often have websites with reports that are like a treasure trove of information that somebody has asked to pull this data on, trying to make the university's strategic plan. And so it's going to have information very pertinent to issues on your own campus. And they don't always make them available just all out there, but sometimes they do. I want to also plug something that we put out this week. DataDa is a new site we have for searching university salary information. You can compare different universities. You can see which kind of faculty members make which money at different universities. And this is based on updated data that just went up. But again, this is something that is, at most campuses you'd have full access to that if you go to DataDa Chronicle.com. And obviously, when you're telling these data stories, as excited as I am about them, you really have to find a story in there. You have to, focus on a person who got some odd perk that is a good story when you're talking about executive compensation. And yes, you still want to put out the tool sometimes if you're doing the data story. So here's one we just got nominated. A couple colleagues of mine got nominated for an Education Writers Association award for something we did about. It's called the $10 billion sports tab, but it's looking at who pays for the kind of fees that go in to paying for athletics at various universities. And so it starts with it's a feature that's really well written. I'm going to go back to the web real quick, if you'll bear with me. So it starts with a narrative of at a specific school, looking at this football game in the Deep South, the Georgia State Panthers coming into the field. So there's a story there to get people, and we're a national publication, so for us we have to pick something. You guys are obvious with your own campus. But at the bottom of this whole story, which I recommend reading, and I can share the link, is this interactive table where you can search by year and by state and by conferences to look at the fees on your own campus. And so often, you can turn to the Chronicle. I encourage you to localize the stories that we're covering nationally. And this whole story, in a way, is like a user guide for how to use this database, right? This tool that then you can go find stories we haven't even thought to tell or that wouldn't work for us as a national publication. So, and encourage you to do the same for any data story you come up with yourself, is share, try to get it into a form where other people can make stories out of it too. Okay, so that was part one, is just some ideas of looking for stories. Some of them I'm sure you guys already are aware of, but just to give some examples. And then now I want to talk about just some trends from looking at the national picture, some things we recently identified. Each year we put out a trends report issue. Sorry for the blurriness here, but just to give you a sense, I'll go through these really quickly. But 10 trends that we're seeing that we think are worth noting, that are really kind of keeping people up at night who run colleges largely. And this year the tone of the report was kind of not all happy and shiny naturally. There's a lot of survival and scrutiny and worry and thinking about productivity. And so obviously campus speech has become a minefield, and there are many issues that we're writing about. Things like trigger warnings. How many of you have been in a class where there's been a trigger warning? And that they're changing attitudes on campuses according to surveys about, and obviously there are issues about chalk markings for Donald Trump that are being seen some places as hate speech, or are they, or what is allowed as far as campus speech. And I think these are very interesting stories, and the attitudes nationally, they seem kind of different than they've been in the past. Some students are saying that racist and sexist speech should be banned. Maybe certain speakers should not be allowed or invited to campus in ways that, and this is obviously, you can find all different issues on opinions on a campus. Culture of consent. So the sexual assault issue I mentioned before, this bystander intervention is a big one that colleges are trying. Even having screensavers in public university computers where they have, try to tell people about to give people trainings, sometimes web-based trainings on campus, kind of consent issues on campus relationships. And even some colleges, like I think Dartmouth we did a story on, are having kind of volunteer people who go to parties and stay sober so that they can kind of watch out for people that are not sober, as far as just looking out for each other, and colleges sometimes encouraging those programs. The faculty are also, it's not just students that things are going on. Faculty are, the publisher perish thing that is that cliche in the academy. The thing now is starting to be like, is Twitter something that should also count? There's a company that some colleges are actually hiring where it kind of analyzes a professor's web identity, that, like Facebook and what's public on Twitter, and tries to measure their impact with a number. Now, some professors don't love this. Not just because their numbers might be low, but because they feel like when they audit that or look at that where that information is, that things are being left out, they say, it gets at like, if this is what's being kept score so that they can be promoted possibly, that's a big issue for faculty. But it gets at their role. The reactive leader, college leaders are having to respond to instances on campuses. And this is Tim Wolf, University of Missouri, who was, I don't know, I'm sure you guys know the story, he ended up being fired, but one of the reasons was because of his interactions with campus protesters.
I will give you an answer, and I'm sure it will be a wrong answer.
He's being asked about systematic oppression.
What do you think systematic oppression is?
Systematic oppression is because you don't believe that you have your equal opportunity for success.
You don't Did you just blame us for systematic oppression, Tim Wolf? Did you just blame black students?
So that did not go over well. But from the people who read the Chronicle, who are often administrators, this is also, a difficult reality that they're living in. What is, when these protests are up, like what is gonna be an answer that's gonna satisfy, how does, for both sides, there's a question about, this is uncharted territory in some cases. There's something called shared governance, which is super boring sounding about universities, but it's tradition in our system, in the university system in this country, which is that faculty, are supposed to be part of the strategy of the university and setting the curriculum and all this stuff. But there are questions right now where there's more university trustees, board of trustees that are exerting or trying to exert more influence in some cases. And there's questions about whether faculty versus governing boards is happening in a way on many campuses that we haven't seen as heated in the past. Outsourcing at colleges, it's not just the food court anymore. There are vendors and parking lots and that kind of thing. There are vendors doing bigger deals and starting to get it closer to the academic mission than ever before. So there are companies, there's a few universities are working with companies that they're calling enablers, but there's one called 2U, where the outside company will help fund a graduate online program. And then because of that online program, to do that, they're putting up a couple $1 million, say, and this company will give the university $2 million in exchange for some huge percentage of the revenue from that graduate program for a couple of years, maybe even up to 10 or 15 years. And so, of course, we've FOIA'd some of these arrangements to try to figure out what's going on. But it's a very new kind of arrangement that when you think about setting up an online program, that starts to get into who's choosing the curriculum, and they're doing it on a lot of different campuses. And there's this idea of the great unbundling of education, where people are talking about even in things that on campuses had never been broken up into pieces and kind of sold to companies or controlled more and more by the private sector. And that's just raising a lot of questions. Research scrutiny. So obviously there have been a lot of issues about just the integrity of research being produced by professors who are trying to publish or perish or tweet. And so transparency is not always the only answer, but we're looking at issues of how to detect fakery in studies like we've seen high-profile cases of in the past year, and even replication, which has been a big issue of are studies being conducted in ways that are honoring the traditions of science. The new transcript. Transcripts are not, again, not as something that seems inherently a sexy topic, but there's this interest in kind of badges or making the transcript more than just this piece of paper you have to order in the mail and no one really looks at it. And so if some colleges are experimenting with having student activities that students are doing already, like being the president of their fraternity, or going to, maybe even going to a conference like this, and having different things count as little credits, badges that are numbers on their diploma. And people are talking about, is this going to turn into the quantified student, like the Fitbit of education, where sort of your record will be this really complicated thing where it's just like you might count steps. How many people have Fitbits? Nobody? Okay, or a couple people. When you're competing with your friends over how many steps, maybe it's going to be this thing where you're looking at different points of your knowledge or achievements on your academic record that you're publicly on some leaderboard of. This is a kind of a new trend we're watching, but some campuses are experimenting with some of these ideas. And then I've only got a couple more here. Instructional design. Colleges are investing in teaching and experimenting with teaching in ways that we haven't seen in the past. Just more money being thrown into it. And obviously, as journalists, we follow the money often. So this new breed of academic is emerging, who are these instructional designers who helping professors. So team build classes. Now this is a story that Meg did while she was at the Chronicle on the boom in these studios that colleges are building. Harvard built a pretty beautiful one in Widener Library, the main library. But a lot of places are doing things even smaller, but just trying to get professors to be making kind of teaching videos to go with their classes. And this is starting to be kind of these little production houses inside of campuses that's never really been this way before. So membership in this group of designers is going up. And colleges are really having to market themselves like they've never had to before, or feeling like they have to. And so they're trying to they're spending a lot in some cases on top tier marketing firms. Obviously, this is a cost to the university, so that affects the cost of college. And also, it's not always paying off. In some cases, they're throwing a lot of money on marketing without really thinking about like, what are they marketing? And so we do a lot of stories about like colleges struggling to find out, well, what are they selling themselves as? What are they trying what can they most see as their niche and differentiate themselves? But even the fact that they're thinking like that is quite different for a lot of, especially liberal arts colleges. So I'm working on this project that is called Relearning, where we're looking at innovation and the future of education. And so we're doing a weekly newsletter and a lot of analysis of stories on this that could also be a resource, I hope, for folks like yourselves. And the last part, this is the part where I want to involve you all, is the peer advice part, where I've gone back, and I do get to work with a lot of amazing interns at the Chronicle. We have a great program. I put a flyer that'll be around somewhere for, if you're interested in working at the Chronicle, we have a great internship program that has new people every semester. But I've gone back and talked to some of my recent interns and some of the folks that I've worked with at a class I teach at the University of Maryland, to just get their advice for you all. So I asked them to help you guys out. And this is what I heard. So Corinne, who is a current intern at the Chronicle, says that she is somebody who goes to office hours, even if she doesn't even need help after class. I don't think this is a completely normal activity, but I think she's a very good reporter. But she says she just asks professors for just like, what did the campus used to be like? Kind of just like tapping into their institutional memory, especially on issues she's covering for the campus paper. And they're often on committees, these professors, on committees that are not gonna, and they're gonna tell you, they might tell you the dirt off the record or a background that you could then have a real deeper understanding or pass it along to your colleagues at the paper. Kristen, who is a recent student of mine, and Marilyn says that she feels like she actually gets a lot, just keep your ears open, should be an obvious one, but literally stories she's had from just listening, overhearing in a class of somebody talking about something that she's like, what? And then she can look into it. I'm assuming you can read these, and I'll make the slides available. Jake, who was an intern for me a couple years ago and is now working at another publication. He's actually competing with us now in Inside Higher Education, but we encourage his work. It's good to have competition. So I now have to we train people and they go out and beat us. But he says, don't forget that you're a real journalist. There's no, don't act, act the part. Just be in there. And if somebody's dismissive of you, that's going to be their problem when your story's amazing. So Angela, who has also worked with us at the Chronicle and now has gone on to internships at the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere, she recommends listservs. They are not sexy, again, like these technologies that are almost like people forget they're there. Some committee on campus might have a listserv that anybody can sign up for, where they're telling their honest, they're giving all the dirt on this issue that they don't realize is public, which is lucky for you. The paper's archive, and often that means even going back and looking at bound volumes that might be yellowing and gathering dust in your own newsrooms. Again, the kind of looks being part of it. Obviously substance is more important than style, but you might as well not wear flip-flops if you're going to go interview the provost or the president. And faculty, again, that these basically professors on your campus are amazing resources and sometimes are more willing to talk than administrators. And last tip, and then I'm going to ask you guys, I'd love for you guys to share with each other because this is, you are also in this game. Dean was one of my students, Dean Esner. He basically was like, don't forget that he got into this because he loves great writing. And so he tries to remind himself by reading great writing, whether it's not even journalism, but literature, of just don't get so into your phone that you forget to do that. Reading for your own pleasure, not just what's assigned to you. So that is what I have for now. I wanted to first, before we get to questions, if you have any, can a few people volunteer to share a tip they might have from experience they've had at their paper? Please, anyone? Meg, do you wanna throw something out at us?
I'm trying to think. We'll talk about this later today, but we've had a really large story thread sort of proliferate over the past year and a half or so, in which two of our reporters have uncovered a lot of information about final clubs on Harvard's campus, sort of the fraternity-like organizations that are a little bit different. And their strategy has just been be really persistent with sources and meeting off the record to start building a relationship and try to get as much documentation as possible. So just getting emails and getting like letters and correspondences to have like concrete information and then use that to I guess, continue forward. And then that we've just been trying to do is just obviously like get documents. It's probably one of our big strategies.
Documents, it's great.
Yeah,
And can you say which paper you're from? Sorry.
yeah, I'm from the University Daily Kansan in Kansas. A story that's sort of also on our campus, that's on a lot of campuses, is sexual assault. And in the last also year and a half, I'd say, this story has really gained a lot of traction, and something that's obvious to a lot of professional newspapers, but maybe not as many college newspapers, is just really, really tapping into your resources with public records. Like, I know you touched on that, but that's something that we really,
You found success there?
Yeah, that's a big part for us, but not just your, in Kansas, there's the Kansas Open Records Act, so not
Sure.
just through that, but also going through the Office of Civil Rights and like learning about all of those really complex topics like Title IX and all of these things. I think that is a tip I would give, is
That's
just
great.
learn about those things, because
I should have said the Ed Department has an Office of Civil Rights.
Yeah.
That's a good one to mention. That's great. And so there's a story that you guys had done particularly from that?
yeah, several stories.
Sure. That's
Yeah.
great. Fantastic. Anyone else? Yep.
Just another thing that an editor of ours told us to do a couple years ago is after you're done writing a story, send a link to your sources to the story so that they see that their voice is like used in the piece, and they'll be more likely to like talk to you afterwards and continue building a relationship. And I found that really useful actually, because a lot of times professors or the people that you're talking to regularly like aren't gonna just go to your website and like search for the story. So it's good if you come to them.
Yeah, and sometimes we'll do that as a tweet too. It depends on the relationship, but that's making sure you don't just like never ever have contact with that person again. That person, if you write them and say, "Hey, thanks for talking to me. Here's the story," that also just might remind them that you're the person they could give a tip to in the future because you're in their email stream. Yeah.
I'm from the Daily Free Press, and I'm actually the campus editor. And racial tension and campus activism has been a big part of BU's life over the past year. And it's difficult to kind of get the voice of the administration, because at the same time, yes, the students are also important, but we have to get the other side as well.
Sure.
And what we've been doing is we actually have bi-weekly meetings with the dean of students, and sometimes it's difficult to like to be able to meet with the provost or like the president. So I think like a tip would be good to kind of have like a constant connection with like one of the administrators, and the dean of students is like a very good person to talk to, because like obviously that position oversees like student life, and that's just like a good tip that we like do.
So to schedule like a regular check-in with an administrator like a student affairs team, that's great. Yeah, that's a great piece of advice.
Yeah, from the Daily Free Studies, I actually like tapping into that. So we have a reporter who enjoys meeting with administrators' secretaries.
Oh, talking to secretaries.
Yeah, because like they are the ones who know like what's going on, and they're the ones who can get you an appointment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In other words, you're friends with them. They're the access point.
Yes.
It's not a bad idea. Yeah.
We've had good success from the Heights of Boston College with having regular meetings with the student government leaders, because since they're our same age, it's easier to get more friendly with them, and then they're more often to stop giving you just like the stock lines about what the student government is doing and actually tell you like what's going on, like and like how they can't talk to the administration or like other challenges they're having, and so that's led us to more interesting stories rather than just what they will say more publicly.
Exactly, yeah, you're always trying to get past that, that moment of the canned press release. So, I think how much time is left?
Just about 2 minutes.
2 minutes. So, any general questions about anything? And, yeah.
So I'm from the Wellesley News, and our campus is really small. We only have about 2,500 people. So a problem we have every week is we kind of have trouble coming up with news topics that are relevant to our campus because it's a little small and there isn't like big protests happening a lot of the time. So
I see.
how would you recommend coming up with interesting news topics every week?
Yeah, well, I guess, I think one of the things that we've learned from, and some of the examples I tried to give is, news is absolutely important, and this is a very big part of why you exist. But there are other ways of giving information to a campus community or any community that reads a publication. And I have a bias toward, I like explainer journalism a lot. There's times where maybe there's an issue that is happening on your campus that you've already covered, or it's not breaking right that minute, but it's an ongoing issue. You could do some sort of useful explainer that's not obvious, or that's not something that they would find elsewhere exactly in that form. There's other ways of, there's always, good features for profiles, or getting at an issue that you might have, that people on campus care deeply about, not just to do some profile just to randomly do it, but to find people that draw out an issue and tell their stories to try to bring something to life. And I think, I like what Josh Benton said about, produce news the way you consume it, because it's like, what do you read elsewhere what made you share or click? And then kind of think about like deconstructing that, like how can you, and it's not always just the hard news, right? Obviously the hard news isn't hard news, like if you forward along what you see first, but when it's not the hard news, what made it work for you enough to click it? And there are absolutely ways to do those stories, no matter how big or small your campus is. And I think that, you think of those different story forms instead of just news. That's what I would encourage. All right. Well, thank you guys for listening, and I would love to talk more quickly.